First of all, I will start with a story. Young Croatian singer that about 15 years ago, at about Christmas, had a concert in a prison. So she enters, gets on the stage, and then says, "I'm so very glad to see you all here." But they were not as glad as she was, but I'm glad to see you. And I must say, as I'm a sycophant, and I have a presentation with over 30 slides, so it will last about 2 hours at least. I have to immediately be a sycophant and say that I'm really thankful to my boss, who is actually the mastermind behind everything. She is the one who was the slave to this event. And I must mention that because they don't think that it is because of us, others. It is really all because of us. And so let's get started. Good morning. I was preparing yesterday and I didn't know which one I was on the schedule, so good day. And actually, I don't know if you have heard of Parkinson's law, which is actually something that really is related to public sector. And that is that the amount of work will fill the time available for its completion. And I don't know, there is a very good story in the book saying, you know, at which point the colonial ministry in the British government had most servants employed at the time that it lost the last colony. So no colonies, but most of the employees. That is somehow what we are talking about when we talk about public sector. So this is just to go through, this is one slide that will not last long. It is just about the structure of the presentation. And I will put in some opening issues. The first thing is, what is public sector? And I will tell you why that question is important. Then the other thing is, what is salary? These are the questions in Croatia, because we have such a deep provision about salary in our law that is basically more of a tax law definition than definition. We previously had a very easy definition. Is the gross amount of money that you get for your work, which was very easy. I won't be answering that question. The first one to wait, and at the end I will tell you whether there is a way out of the situation we are in now. So, public sector. If you check the definition of public sector, you would find something that we do not equate necessarily as public sector. Local self-government. We do not count local self-government to public sector, even though it fulfills all the criteria. So, I'm already telling you, this is not the full story about public sector in Croatia. It is a story of a public sector that we consider public sector, which entails civil service and public services. Therefore, there is this big question whether this should have been included. I didn't include it because I was actually looking at most recent legislation. Just maybe to put something as a note in brackets. You can't have works councils if you work in city administration, in country administration, state administration, but you can have city council if you work, workers council if you work in the city administration. It already shows that there is this balance in the regulation, which is also related then to salaries. What is public sector? Well, on one side, we have ideas coming from Max Weber, which actually says that it is power, state power with authority providing services. Problem with that is that that's such a rigid definition. On the other hand, as we have already heard before, we have this liberal or libertarian view, managerial view from private sector, stressing performance and then pay based on performance, which is a completely different view. They basically taking a look at the private sector, not as the public one. Then we can open the issue about salaries. And here is about salaries. I would point out to the fact that this first equity theory points out to the main problem of the regulation of salaries in public and civil service today. The fact that people from inside think that they are not getting enough, that they are worse treated than somebody else, that they are in a way discriminated against. There are so many theories. One of those is that one that I really think is the best, that actually pay does not itself lead to performance. There must be some other sort of incentive to lead to performance, not just single pay. Let's see where this all is happening. This all is happening in the area of about 240,000 employees. And the ones that I'm not covering are those 20,000 working in local self-government. And I'm not counting towards that public enterprises, those providing some communal services. So we are talking about some 13 to 15% of employed people in Croatia. More than a quarter of GDP. We are talking about main areas, civil servants, and then all civil services entailing first largest one, education and healthcare, and then we have state administration and social care. This is the size of services. Here the net salary is about 1,300 euros. For last year, that was rather high growth because of the change in legislation. Gross salary that's a bit higher, and then actually we saw last year about 13.5% of increase of salary in the whole public sector. Still, this whole thing that was happening before because private sector was and still is offering to an extent higher salaries. If you compare not just the person, but the educational degree of the person, because most of the people working for the state are higher qualified, higher educated than those working in private sector. Still, public sector in Croatia is chosen because of stability. And even if you see who is top employers in Croatia, it's actually people coming from trade, from commerce, which is not a place that you were otherwise think of best or most wanted employers. We have a problem. The public sector was for a long period of time struggling with the problem of not being attractive for young, educated employees. We see it today in education. People who 10 or 15 years, best students wanted to work at university. We do not get candidates because the salaries in universities are too low for the starting positions. Let's go further on. Until 2024, we have had a highly fragmented and really not transparent pay system. We had about 4,500 job definitions. I mean, every ministry had a definition of its own. Every public service had a definition of its own. People who were actually experts of same expertise at the same level. We have had for a long period of time union resistance to reform proposals. Of course, unions are afraid of changes because they are always scared that changes could or would or should lead to dismissals. And there was a problem that there were huge inequalities over different sectors. If you take a look even today into the salary in health provision, it's health services. It's smaller or not really so big as basic salary, but when you take everything into account, it becomes really higher than the salaries of our top officials, president, prime minister, etc. So in 2024, we did have a reform aiming at standardizing wages. A project that was actually well thought and really was a lot of effort, time, and money invested into it, with a goal to include more fairness and transparency into wages. Right to salary, these are the sources that we have in Croatia. It looks rather easy. This is the general situation overall. But then we go to a little bit more complexity or complications. When we look at civil service, public services, then we have one general level covered with the regulations of the Labor Act. Then we have a specific level of all public services together, governed by specific law and specific collective bargaining agreement. And then we have an even more specific level of public services themselves, which has one collective bargaining, and they have specific statutory regulation each. We have a multitude of laws. If you probably measured how many norms regulate employment relationship in public services in Croatia, it would really be a huge book. A book that actually hardly anyone sees it in its entirety. Hardly anyone. We do not have an overview of employment relationship overall in Croatian public sector. So, at the level of civil service, we have Civil Servants Act plus a collective bargaining agreement. At the level of all public services, we have Institutions Act and basic collective agreement for civil services. And then at specific level of health, education, culture, we have specific laws regulating employment relationship plus specific collective agreements. Imagine all that. And not to stop at that. We also have a norm that allows for horizontal application of more favorable rights in between civil service and public services. So actually, you would need ChatGPT solely for that. And put attempt, please explain to me. And then I'm not really sure if it could explain itself. In 2024, we have introduced Act on Salaries in Civil Services and Public Services with a lot of subsector regulation. A lot. That's not only that. We also have a situation that today, in public services, we actually have only collective bargaining agreement at the level of all public services, but not in specific services. But in specific services, we have a decision of government that even though there are no collective bargaining agreements, they would still provide for all the rights from previous agreements, which is a weird situation. It's not a collective bargaining agreement, it's not an extension, nobody knows. It's a government decision, whatever that will be. So, who does this new legal framework now in place for about a year, who does it apply? It applies to civil servants and employees which are not in specific status in civil service, and also to the employed in public services. However, it still does not apply to military personnel, diplomatic staff, security services, etc., 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 because they were happy enough to be excluded. Not to have transparency. In Croatia, not being transparent is benefit, you get more, because you hide more. The whole regulation was in a way partial, because everything was put into some statutory regulation, which is actually a problem. You will see why. We somehow ill-conceived. We have a big problem. Imagine, in the law regulating salaries, you never mention, you never explain that you have performance evaluation, but whatever you do, it is not proportionate according to our Constitution, because you didn't explain how that relates to salaries. Obviously, it doesn't. It's now pending before the Constitutional Court. We have an inconceived system where the government itself said maximum supplements can be 20%. Why put that into law? Because the government, as negotiating party, could say we are not giving more than 20%. Why put that in the norm in the law? Because now that it's in the law, then everybody says if 20% is maximum, we will not agree to less than 20%. It's highly politicized. We have specific situation that unions were not as included. It's not really transparent. The fact that all regulations which are simply those that are done by one side, by the government, it allows for complete politicization of the system. We have also a council for monitoring of the salary system, which now is in place for more than a year and has not changed anything, not even for 1 millimeter. So imagine, that's even the better employer than education, because there you really don't have to work. Law of 54 articles, 32 regulating substance, but 22 being transitional and final provisions. Complete procedure. I mean, this shows that there is something lacking in the law. We have 15 categories of employees, I told you, that are exempt from the system. You're basically exempting a high number of people out of the law that should be general regulation. There is, okay, social care, not right. We have 8 coefficients, 16 pay grades. Why? Nobody knows. Why 8? Why 16? Why not 7, 9, 20, or 26? And so many things left for decrease in the regulations of the relevant ministers. Why? If you have a law, why not regulate it in a law? Because the law can't be unilaterally changed. It has to go through the parliament. If you have regulation, you can change it every day. That is also an issue where the constitutionality is questioned. Salary. Salary, basic salary, that is basically made up from base for salary calculation and salary coefficient that are multiplied. We have trainee getting 90% of full salary, and I just mentioned in the first version of the law, there was the sentence saying that the average monthly number of hours would be calculated as 173. Try to divide 173 with 8, which is general number. Obviously, there is a Monday starting at 13:25, or there is a Friday ending at noon, because otherwise it can't work. It was simply ill-conceived, as I said at the beginning. Okay, good. Salary supplements. There are salary supplements that are mentioned. First one being for years of service, something that I, for years and years now, don't understand. Why is an older worker more expensive for the employer? That is a question. Should it not be the other way around? Especially if the second thing is work efficiency. How does that go hand in hand? Work efficiency allows you to, if you have best grade, every 2 years jump into higher pay grade. If you have second best grade, 3 years. If you have third best grade, 6 years. If you have satisfactory grade, you don't get anything more. And if your behavior and performance is not satisfactory, then you have a handshake and a farewell party because you are not working anymore. Funny thing is, you have all these supplements, and then I say it can all, in collective bargaining agreement, amount to 20%. I'm not really sure would that work in International Labour Organization. If you say you can negotiate, but all you can negotiate for is top 20%. I'm not really sure that is something that you can then call collective bargaining. Because there is just set of rules that you have to buy. Not really freedom. We even have a financial award once a year, which is, for me, weird situation. I would always award the employee for good performance that year. However, we went into a different direction. If you perform well 1 year, you get some sort of grade that follows you the whole of your life. If you are what comes after that. We never found out who put the initial coefficients, because the law states that there must be an evaluation of each work position, because before the coefficient would be set. It did not happen because the coefficients were done. The very same day, when also we had actually passed the regulation regulating the measuring of and passing the coefficients. It doesn't make sense. Nobody explained why the range is between 1 and 8. Why the highest salary 8 times higher? There is actually a reason. Because 8 times lowest coefficient is actually the pilot driving the government aircraft. So because of 2 or 3 people working in the whole area, we actually invented such high coefficient. Actually everything is much more flat. There are interrelations between services. We today have mediation before strike in education because people in education feel that they have gotten least. They didn't get not nearly as much as other services. Performance evaluation is something that, because of, I would say, unclear regulation, is not being done, even though it should have started with the beginning of this year. So we have a law that is enforced, but is not being used over 6 months. We have problems with supplements that I would say show that trade unions didn't do their homework because they allowed their activities to be limited. We had lack of inclusions, and at some point when we were translating all these job positions, there was an unbelievable provision saying that all people in Croatia must get new employment contracts. But everybody was at some point writing new contracts, which is, I would say, not really ecological, not really green, printing all that paper outside. There are some doubts about application to certain public services. There is a problem with performance evaluation, and there are doubts regarding the constitutionality of everything that we really got. It sounds like somebody from the academia just saying some boring stuff, but if you take into consideration that the Croatian public sector is the major economic actor, both as the regulator, employer, and the investor, because it is the largest sector in Croatia, then problems in the public sector are problems for the whole economy and the whole country. The other thing is that we still have brain drain. We have still brain drain that troubles our public sector still, even though we have gotten increased salaries. There is an issue how to attract and to retain skilled workers, not only in economy. You can substitute those, maybe with people coming from Nepal or Philippines, but can you do it in public sector? Do you want to do it in public sector? Would you want people from Nepal to be teachers of Croatian language or Croatian fields? Probably not. Then we also have high performance, high public wage bill that is not matched by performance. We are not balancing the increase, one-time increase of salary with our economic output, with our stability and output of our system. And the question that nobody asks is whether these reforms were fiscally sustainable. They were implemented 1 month before the elections, and you can understand that this was a big plus for the political actors who passed them. We always come to question what the salary is. The salary is somehow for the public official something that helps him and gives him security against arbitrary dismissal and assured independence. That's one view of the thing. But the other one that comes also to something that was your remark previously is Peter Drucker's idea. There is no profit in public sector. However, there is a measurable performance. And even if it's not easily measured, it should at least somehow be measured. So thank you, and sorry for